And certainly God can do something wrong if he wants to, but he doesn't want to because
he can?
He's just.
Right, but he can do something wrong?
His sense of justice that makes him say, I'm not going to do it wrong.
But I just wanted to explore that a little bit more. But you think, at least in theory, he could actually do something wrong?
He could if he wanted to, but that would be unperceivable on his part.
What she's using here is Watchtower reasoning that the nature of God must be determined and derived first from the nature of man instead of the other way around. They use quite a bit of category error to promote these ideas. This is why they end up with such a weak, rather pathetic and powerless deity. And I think it's clear why they insist on continuing with this very faulty and unbiblical foundation. When we examine what we can know about the very nature of God based on his own standards and his word alone, what we see is a holy and just and truly all-powerful sovereign God. That's the kind of thing that will drive you to your knees in fear and trembling. So instead, they prop him up on their ideologies in such a way that stops JWs from really considering who God actually is and why they should be terrified of this mighty God. Instead, they can just focus on their own personal works and doing enough to prove their loyalty to the organization. Sadly, it's also the very specific lie that prevents them from seeing the gospel, falling to their knees, repenting, and trusting in Christ alone for salvation. The whole thing is both sinister and heartbreaking. Now, she will kind of suggest that this is more of her own reasoning because she doesn't have any specific Watchtower articles to share about it. But I think it's clear that her attempt at reasoning on the subject certainly is bathed in Watchtower training and indoctrination. Wouldn't that be...
He's got the power to do whatever he wants, you know.
Okay,
I mean, you look at the homosexual nowadays. When he reads a passage that homosexuality is wrong, he's going to say that God is wrong.
Yes, that's what a human will say. Yeah, but so God can do anything?
Well, he's powerful. You look at, he made the universe.
Right, but is there anything he can't do?
It's beyond human thinking of what he couldn't do, I think.
Okay,
because when you look at the universe and like I've been watching the NASA channel on TV, and when you see those pictures of outer space, you know, with all those gases and all those colors, and it's just mind-boggling. And this is God's creation. Who's doing this?
Yeah. So, but doesn't the scripture say that God cannot lie?
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so that's something he can't do then. And that's good that he can't.
There's a difference between can't and not wanting to.
But it doesn't say doesn't want to. It says he can't lie.
Yeah, we think of can't as being like impossible, beyond the power of that person.
Yes.
But in Jehovah's case, the can't means he wouldn't do it.
Interesting. Okay.
You know, because the power is beyond our comprehension.
Yeah, okay. Now, I'm wondering...
We have to be reasonable.
With that, do you have any specific... I'm putting you on the spot here, but maybe we could look into it. Do you know of any Watchtower materials, any of their publications or anything that talks more about that specifically?
About what?
About God choosing not to sin, but it's not that he can't sin, it's that he just doesn't want to? Or that, yeah.
I can't think of anything because it's a thought that doesn't make sense, really.
Okay.
You know, because as I say, it's a simple thinking of that a 2-year-old can understand.
Okay.
That God can because he has the power, but his sense of justice tells him, no, he won't.
Okay.
And won't
So,
is can't.
would you mind, I'll try on my end too, but would you mind if you get a chance sometime in the next few weeks to try to look into that a little bit and see if you've got any that you could tell me about that I could read from your website?
Yeah, I'll check into it.
Okay, thank you.
You know, the only ones I could think of is like that would just magnify his power.
Right,
And,
yeah.
And it doesn't deal, we don't dwell on that concept of God sinning, you know.
Mm-hmm, okay. Okay.
Because that is not a concept that is reasonable, you know, of God.
Mm. Okay.
If we have a faith in a God, how could I have a faith in a God that I have to prove to myself that he can sin?
Well, I would hope that we can trust a God who can't sin, and that's what gives us faith in him. That's something that we can trust him because of that.
That goes without saying, you know. So I just can't think of any articles that even deal with that we've ever dealt with.
Okay.
With that, but I'll check it out and see if I can come up with something. But,
okay, yeah, I appreciate that. That would be great, because I don't mind reading stuff on the website just to get a broader sense of what you believe.
You know, you can even, if you wanted to, you could, because there's always, on the website, there's always questions often asked. And you can type in that request, and then you'll be able to get information on there.
Yeah, I've used the search function on there sometimes to try and find specific, depending on what I'm looking for. Sometimes it's too broad a subject to, you might end up with.
You've got to narrow it down.
Yeah, exactly. And if you can't word it quite right.
It's a machine, so you've got to sort of pinpoint.
Exactly, yeah. So if the words are not unique enough, I guess, then you could end up with thousands and thousands of pages to look through.
And yes, and a lot of them wouldn't relate really to the point that you were looking for.
Exactly, yeah. So, but sometimes it helps. Sometimes I can find stuff right away.
But if you wanted to, you could go ahead and do that. Feel free if you feel like,
Yeah. I'll definitely take a look.
There's a lot of information on there.
Do you think maybe she just ticked off the box on her time card to tell them that she promoted the website in our talk? Unfortunately, I have to admit that I really didn't even know what to say about her comments regarding God supposedly being able to sin. I needed some time to think about that and try to figure out what angle I might tackle it from. She reinterpreted scripture that clearly says God cannot lie to mean, in her mind, that he just chooses not to. I probably should have pressed harder to look at the clear reading of the text and how her interpretation is not what it says. Thankfully, we do tend to circle back around to the same subjects again and again in our conversations. So I chose to change the subject to ask her something else I was curious about. This call was in the fall of 2020, and I was still seeing evidence that there were JWs standing out at their carts in some parts of the U.S. and also specifically in the Philippines. I think that did eventually change, and I'm not sure that any JWs are doing the carts or any door-to-door work anymore, though. It's an interesting subject to me because they really love to use the government rules and mandates as their primary reason to have stopped all the work that they are so proud of. But at the same time, they hate the government. So I think there has to be some major cognitive dissonance going on with this whole thing. The government runs this wicked system of things, but we need to trust them to keep us safe as long as the governing body says so. And on top of that, in some areas, they were still doing the carts anyway. So what's going on with that? So I was wondering, if you don't mind my asking, how does it work now with you guys? Because I know the Kingdom Halls are all closed now, right, for the COVID?
Yeah, because it's especially in BC here now.
Yeah. So how do you get your monthly hours in now of service?
Well, we now that we can't go door to door, we do some telephoning work.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And of course, we've been doing telephoning work before too, because there's especially in the bigger cities, there's lockout apartments. You see.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So we've always been done telephoning.
Yeah.
It's always been part of the service, although we were going door to door before COVID.
And how does that work with like, I know they've changed, there's a lot more restrictions on, I guess, what you would call cold calling, you know, like when you don't already have a connection with that person.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have like a list of phone numbers that are not on the do not call list or something like that?
Yeah, there's websites with Statistics Canada that you could get telephone numbers if you have an address.
Okay, okay. So is that how you do it then?
Mm-hmm.
Like you personally?
Well, we do it as groups, in groups.
Oh, I see. So you're all sort of...
We have groups on Zoom, and then little groups.
Okay.
Like chat rooms that they're called, and then we'll exchange numbers. Some of the pioneers, they've been very diligent in getting phone numbers.
Okay.
I'm not as well versed in that, so I joined the group, and the organizer of that little group will give each individual some numbers to call.
I see. Okay. Okay.
And they can call on their own private phone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like I'm talking to you now.
Yeah. So have you been able to connect with a few people that you can keep talking with, or is it just...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, we do, yes.
Okay.
There's pioneers that are doing it every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Yeah, and then you can sit in the comfort of your own couch instead of having to stand at people's doors and stand out on the street.
Nice in the wintertime.
Yeah, especially, yeah. Yeah, okay. Well, I was just curious how that works for you guys now, because I've heard some people say there are certain areas here and there in the States and in some other countries where there are some witnesses that are still taking their magazine carts out, but it's very limited. There aren't very many that are doing it.
Well, it would depend on the territory that they're in, what's allowed, what the government is allowing in that area.
Yeah.
Because all the rules aren't, the same rules aren't applicable.
Right. Yeah.
Anywhere, even across the province here, they're different.
Yeah. So if it were allowed for you to stand out with a magazine cart, would your people from your Kingdom Hall be doing that right now? Or are you following an overall rule from headquarters?
Well, we'd follow a presiding decision by the governing body.
Okay.
And that's interesting that you mention that, because did you know that it's not, and it hasn't been well talked about, but in Brazil, Brazil, for a smaller country, has a high account of COVID cases and deaths.
Mm.
And that they're a third after United States.
Oh.
And yet they're not the size of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So in ratio, that's very bad.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because they were like the United States that didn't acknowledge the seriousness of COVID when it first started.
Mm.
And the same thing was happening in the States and in Brazil. And of course, that started originally in China, and China was ignoring it, you see, and that's why it got out of hand.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, when Brazil numbers got so high, and finally the president acknowledged that there was a problem, and he had the health department initiate rules and regulations. And I guess one government official approached our headquarters in Brazil, and they heard that the witnesses had been isolating themselves way in January, as opposed to when Brazil started isolating cases in June of this year. So the official, when he talked to the official in the headquarters in Brazil, he said, "How did you guys know that this was a dangerous thing?" Well, it wasn't any miracle. It was just common sense.
Mm-hmm.
The officials were watching what was happening in other countries, and they said, "Oh, it's spreading through contact. We'll just limit the contact."
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's just a common sense
Yeah.
rationale.
Yeah.
But the United States didn't do that. Brazil didn't do that. China didn't do that.
This is not the only time that my JW friend brings up this little story that she heard from a video on their website. I think it's a favorite of hers to repeat as often as she can. You can tell it really gives her a tremendous amount of pride. I could have actually brought up a number of points to debate her on regarding all the government stuff, but I wasn't looking for a debate about that issue, so it's really off topic for the purpose of our discussion, and I didn't see anything fruitful coming from that. So I just listened and let her talk. I do find it a little comical listening to this now, more than a year later though, with so much more information available. But anyway, I was able to find the video that I'm pretty sure inspired this little promotional that she just did. It discussed both Brazil and Ecuador. She might have been mixing the two stories together a bit. Not a big deal either way though. I'll put a link to the original video in the notes below. I found the whole video quite disturbing.
Ecclesiastes 7:12 says this, Ecclesiastes 7:12, "Wisdom is a protection, just as money is a protection. But the advantage of knowledge is this: wisdom preserves the life of its owner." So, in harmony with that, our aim has been and will continue to be to make wise, balanced decisions that protect lives. As an example, back in March, we made the decision to hold the Gilead graduation with no invited guests present. That was a big change. But that one decision protected so many lives here at Bethel in New York, and among those who would have been guests. Little did we know that just a short time later, New York would become an epicenter of the pandemic. We thank Jehovah for helping us to make that wise decision. What's the lesson? Because we place a high value on life, we need to follow direction, even if it seems overly cautious or means significant changes in our theocratic activities. That obedience will help to keep all of us as safe as possible. In the following video, note how this has proved to be the case for the brothers in South America, where the outbreak of COVID-19 cases has surged in recent weeks. We'll hear from Brother Anthony Carvalho, who serves on the Brazil Branch Committee, and from Brother Jaime Tamayo, who serves on the Ecuador Branch Committee. Their reports show the benefits of obedience, even if at first we don't understand the reasons for the direction.
The outbreak of COVID-19 has already taken tens of thousands of lives in Brazil. And so we've come to appreciate how the early direction we received from the organization was a real protection. One example is a sister who is a medical doctor. She said that when the branch office gave direction to suspend meetings at the Kingdom Hall, she honestly did not agree. There weren't any confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the region, and the local government had not ordered any restrictions. So she felt the brothers might be exaggerating the threat a bit. But then she reasoned on how Jehovah has sometimes given his people direction that didn't make sense from a human standpoint, and so she decided to obey. Well, shortly after congregation meetings were suspended, the government put restrictions in place. COVID-19 began to spread rapidly in the region, and sadly, many have died. Our sister said that she now sees a direction from the organization was a real protection. She related, "Seeing how Jehovah is caring for us in a loving and tender way, even on an individual level, has increased my confidence in him." While this is just one example of many here in Brazil, where we have truly seen the benefits of obediently following theocratic direction.
There is no question that the early direction we received in Ecuador saved lives. For instance, one publisher, Fabricio, started to have some flu-like symptoms, but his doctor told him that it was the common flu and not COVID-19. Still, Fabricio followed the instructions from the organization to stay home if you have any symptoms of illness. Later he said, "All in our family agreed that it was important to follow these instructions since they were given to protect us." During the following weeks, he and his family didn't allow anyone into the house. Even when relatives came to visit them, they received them outside the house to maintain a safe distance. Around the same time, meetings at the Kingdom Hall were suspended. Well, several weeks later, Fabricio tested positive for COVID-19, and so did 3 family members. Fabricio's family is so glad that they followed instructions received from the organization. They maintained distancing protocols even without a positive diagnosis of COVID-19. This protected the lives of others, including their extended family and the congregation. This really helped us appreciate the wisdom of suspending congregation meetings when we did. Doing so prevented the spread of the disease to others.
What a powerful example of how our obedience to direction is a protection and a blessing.
We'll stop here for today. Next time we'll pick up with lots more discussion about this subject before we finally move on to other issues.